that wasn't made for you. Imagine wondering every day what challenges you will have to face that the majority of the rest of the world doesn't have to face. And imagine knowing that if a bill was passed, it could make your life so much easier. Today I want to talk to you about a bill called the Technology Bill of Rights for the Blind. This legislation was proposed by the National Federation of the Blind. I will tell you how important this bill is to all of the blind and visually impaired citizens of the United States. I will provide examples of how this bill will change the lives of blind and visually impaired people and make it possible for them to become completely independent and non-reliant on others. I am going to start by telling you about the bill. This bill was introduced into the House of Representatives. The bill mandates that all consumer electronics, home appliances, kiosks, and electronic office technologies provide user interfaces that are accessible through non-visual means such as speech output or tactile recognition. Speech output is when the device uses text-to-speech software to read what is being displayed on the screen. A tactile difference is some kind of tactile difference on the touchscreen panel or like Braille on the buttons. The speech output is very important for elderly people who have lost their sight because they won't have the same sensitivity in their fingers to be able to read the Braille. Examples of accessible equipment already available to the visually impaired are all Apple products. All Apple iPods, iPads, iPhones, and laptops are accessible right out of the box by using a software Apple developed called VoiceOver. VoiceOver uses a text-to-speech feature to read what is being shown on the screen. Apple also uses zoom and color change features for people with some sight. If Apple can do this, so can other companies. The bill proposed will make it possible for blind and visually impaired people to live completely and independently and safely at home by themselves. I was chosen to go to Washington, D.C. 2 years ago with 24 other blind and visually impaired students to lobby for this bill. During my travels to and from D.C., the importance of the bill was realized. Even though I traveled with my mother, I was in charge of getting us through the airport and to D.C. I hit my one and only roadblock right away. I wasn't able to check us into the airport due to the fact that the kiosk was not accessible. The kiosk was a touchscreen panel that didn't have a tactile difference or any kind of speech output. If the kiosk would have had a tactile feature and speech output, I could have checked myself in independently. Other times I encounter a problem is any time I try to use a household appliance, because there is not a law that mandates that household appliances are accessible to the visually impaired. I have to either modify the touchscreen panels or memorize the positions of various buttons. If this bill would pass, it would make it possible for me and other visually impaired people to be completely independent at home. The guidelines established by this bill would make it possible for me to live safely at home without help from other people. This bill is so important because as technology use increases in the home and office, blind people may become less productive members of society. Some pieces of technology, such as a laptop or a computer, can be accessed after the blind or visually impaired person buys a separate program to be downloaded onto the device. The problem with doing it this way is it's very expensive. The device is not accessible right out of the box, and you can only use your own computer. Do you have a cell phone? Are you able to read your text messages? What if you were blind and your phone did not have a voiceover option? What if you had to special order a phone that had the ability to read your text messages instead of getting the phone you really wanted? Again, imagine not being able to use an ATM to get cash. You may be thinking, well, there's Braille on the keypad, so why can't the visually impaired person use the ATM? Well, in fact, less than 10% of the 1.3 million blind or visually impaired citizens of the United States don't know how to read Braille. And even with Braille on the keypad, the blind user would not be able to use the ATM because they can't read the screen to know what button they are being asked to push. If the ATM had a speech output and tactile feature, all visually impaired people could use the ATM independently. Again, imagine not being able to use a vending machine to get your snacks. What if you had to just push a button and get whatever snack came out? What if you were really craving chocolate and you ended up with licorice? Blind people have to tolerate this, but sighted people would be extremely frustrated and wouldn't tolerate this. So blind people, we shouldn't have to. Imagine not being able to scan your credit card at the grocery store. Imagine not being able to do the simplest of things and having to rely on others because they're not accessible. Some people may think this bill has nothing to do with them because they're not blind and don't know anyone who is. But in fact, this bill does have something to do with them. Because if this bill was passed, blind and visually impaired people could be completely independent and non-reliant on others. They would be students that don't need all different specialized equipment, and it would be much easier for them to be employed. If this bill was passed, employers would not have to buy special equipment for their employee. They also would not have to modify existing equipment. So it would make it much easier for blind people to become employed. According to the American Foundation for the Blind, 40 to 45% of working age 18 to 69-year-old blind people are employed. The employment rate would be much higher if this bill was passed. This bill would also help to expand equality through all people that are visually impaired. I encourage you, the next time you go on a plane, go shopping, or go to the bank, think of all the things you did that a blind person could not have done independently. This bill is so important because it mandates that all consumer electronics, home appliances, kiosks, and electronic office technologies provide user interfaces that are accessible through non-visual means such as speech output or tactile recognition. I really hope you consider supporting this bill and that you consider contacting your state's member of Congress. By sending them a simple email, you could change the lives of so many people. The bill number is HR 4533.